Alright, hello everyone, this is HeroesPath here, and today is going to be a sort of tutorial thing. I was asked by a friend that is working along with Jeff, the creator of the Untold Chronicles South Park, that since they want to get into animating, they wanted to kind of have a bit of a basis of what to go off of. So what's usually in the works today, which is sort of unfortunate if you're used to the older programs, is Adobe Animate. And Adobe Animate was made on the sense of better character rigging, a better sense of using a camera rather than having to go in a plugin. A lot of different Mojo Jojo they decided to add in. You have different ways you can go about it, of course, whichever you prefer. I'd say if you're starting out with animation, you want to make it a HD, not regular HD, the full HD, which you're going to have a lot of room to mess around with. So with that being said, there's a few things that you have to remember with using. If you've never used Flash before, we'll go over the basics. This here is a timeline. If you've ever messed with Flipnote, you do know you have a timeline. It just doesn't look something like this. What I'm sure most people are used to of a timeline from Flipnote is that you see the actual picture. One that comes with Flash is always going to be keyframes. Keyframes are essential to lining up how you want the animation to be. And we'll do the basic, and I know what you're thinking. A lot of people see the bouncing ball and it's like, but you want to move arms and everything. You have to understand the basic principles of animation just to do what it is you wish to do. And I'll show you a few things. So we'll start with a bouncing ball. And first, before we make an actual timeline, we're gonna place where we want the ball to be. So you grab your pen tool here and you come to properties if you don't have it already. What I like to do is set my smoothing to around in between low and high, not medium, but around there. And I make sure that it's a nice small brush size. Why? If you put it to high, it tends to be a little bit strange using, and I'll show the differences. Although one is a lot better, when you're trying to animate, you want to provide as much information as possible. So you could potentially use this, but now you have to force your hand to try to create that line width, whereas if you lower it, more of your line width comes through, which makes an animation look a little bit more hand-drawn, whereas one of these is a little bit more, I believe it's called like robotic or unified. So we are going to just make a ball. Now you can cheat this by using the Ellipse Tool. I want to say if you're going to animate, teach yourself to draw a ball. It's never going to come out perfect. You can mess with it as much as you want. Even if you do one of these, don't beat yourself up for not making the most perfect ball. You'll get there with time. So we're going to grab the paint bucket and make sure your line quality is together. And when I mean together, there should be no gaps. So if I fill this in right now, there should be no gaps that come out of this. So there's two ways you can fill these things in. You can fill them in on the same layer, or if you're so bold as to try to add more shading and everything, you don't want it on the same layer. Where you want it is on the below layer. In this case, we do need a little bit of shading. So what we will do is we're going to make an outline around it and try to erase it as best as possible. We're not going to get the perfect erasing that we want for this, but we can get something close to it. So as you can see, the ball is still not there. Also be very careful when you hit transform or control T. You have to actually manually go find it. If you hold shift, you can make shapes bigger, and I'm sure most other artists like Jeff and everything has gone over these kind of tools, but it never hurts to reteach yourself some of the stuff that might help you to make animations. And we're just gonna go over the basic, mostly since I know a lot of people that are going to be looking for this are going to make South Park animations. There is a difference, but it still follows the same type of method. Alright, perfect. So now we have our ball. Before we go a step further, we have also frames per second. You can keep it at 24, that is usually the minimum. I've done most of my animations on 29 frames. Is there a reason to the madness? Yes. It's what I was taught through my college studies, and it does help, but it also forces you to think drastically as you are attempting to do several parts of the animation. So let's designate the ball having a light coming from this side of the screen. So that will allow me to, whoops. The beauty of doing this is I can take this and put this on the other slide. That's the only weird thing when it comes to Animate. If you're trying to color in, they have to be on the same layer, but if you're trying to do what we did earlier of coloring below, you want to do that to make it easier to avoid any mistakes. What I like to do is try to mess with these to figure out where my highlights are. And you don't want to go too drastic with highlights, you want to keep it within the same spectrum. We'll probably make it like a teardrop shape in a circle. It looks like an exclamation mark. But we now have a ball that looks like it belongs in a 3D space. So we are going to combine this, and we are going to call this symbol ball. Now, there's a few ways you can do symbols. You can leave them as movie clips, graphic, which is for a later date, of course, but most of the time you want to use movie clips. We'll call this ball. And now we have our ball. And what we want is a simple in-between of it bouncing from one side of the screen to another. Now, to make this a little bit more believable, you don't have to, but I do recommend for beginners, you want to set up a ground plane. You can cheat it, you can use a box for all you want. So long as there is an indicated ground plane, then you're in the clear when it comes to animating. If there is no ground plane, you lose that visual sense of space and it becomes harder for the viewer to tell where it is this object could be located. So we'll make it a decent gray. So we have our ground, and just to make sure we don't confuse it, you can rename it to BG or to ground plane. You can rename this to ball. So we know that our ball is stagnant on this page, and I am going to move it so it's a bit more centered with my ground plane. So you want to animate this. Now we have to focus on how many frames or how long we want this to last. Let's say it takes about maybe 2 seconds for this ball to reach the other side of the screen. So you're going to head over to 2 seconds, make sure that both are highlighted, and you're going to hit F5, and that will stretch out your frame all the way out to the amount of seconds you just selected. So we're going to take our ball, we're going to right click and hit Motion Tween. Now Motion Tween will allow me from this keyframe here, which is 1, to come all the way to maybe about 55 seconds, we'll say. And you can either click this, or in my favor, you can just always hold Shift and just use your arrow keys to gently move it across the screen till it is out of frame again and on the other side. So now your ball is going to look something kind of like this. Boring and dull, because a ball doesn't actually move like that rolling across the screen. And we are going to do this 2 ways. We're not just going to do regular ball. We're going to do Motion Tween, which you can use to cheat. You can. But it doesn't give you that same realism, and I'll explain that in a second. So this ball is really cheaply made. So what we can do, however, is make this an ease of 100. That will allow the ball, when it gets towards the end, to slow down, which makes it a little bit more believable. Now, that's all fine and dandy, and yes, this does actually work for South Park animations. You just have to remember throughout the animation, so let's say we go back here, and we can try to rotate it slowly. You can see now it has a little bit more believability to it. Dear God, that was the slowest ball roll I have ever seen. Please do not do that. It works, it just doesn't give that believability you want. So while there is this method, and we'll just change this to ball roll, and while you could pull these to make it seem like it bounces, which if I were to duplicate this and try to do that, we'll hide this guy. Come back in here, and say about here, oh, whoops. I always gotta love that. There we go. Oh, the beauty of Animate. I think because I have easing, it will not let me touch this. But normally you can just take your object. Oh my God. And you just want to kind of throw it into the air. Throw it back down. Kind of like if you were throwing an actual ball. The only problem is this method is going to look very uniformed. That's the word I was looking for. Very uniformed. And it won't look like the ball is actually trying to leave the screen at all. It's going to look like a hot mess on your screen. We'll call this one the ball bounce 1. And I'm sure for a lot of beginners it's like, well, it looks easy, yes. You want it to be a little bit more lifelike. So we're going to take our ball again. Oh God, the ball, cooperate please. That's as best as that's going to get, I think. Yep. Alright, so we're going to take this ball now, and we're going to make it seem a little bit believable. So what you first want to do before you even animate the ball, you want to designate how long this is going to take you. So in the sense of an arch format, we're obviously going to make a few arches. We'll put one here, one here, one here, and one here. And I know what you're thinking is like, well, what does this have to do with me animating a simple ball? Well, this format, and I'll make it a little bit brighter so it's a little bit easier to see against my background. This format allows you to plan out each action, and this does apply to anything you do. If you're doing a walk cycle, it requires the same kind of timing. Now, you can't time a walk, but you can time the beats to a walk. So every walk cycle, and if you're doing the same type of timing applies to. If you're doing a walk cycle, the best thing, 1, is to find an animation reference, and 2, don't try to exaggerate it. I've seen my teachers do this, that they say, well, your legs go out this far and all that, and it's like, no. You can always look to reference, but if you're trying to make it as humanistic as possible, make sure it's always done in short strides. Oh God, spelling. In short strides. Once you do it in short strides, it gives that more human aspect. And my animations that I have on my YouTube do prove that I can make them look as humanistic without breaking the ratio of what is realism, what isn't. That being said, that timeline, that kind of pacing applies to a bouncing ball. So what we'll take is, we'll take a blue, and we'll put lines all on these, indicating where it is and this is where it's going to end. Now what the in-betweens there are for are to indicate what we're going to be doing with them. So for example, we're going to find the middle of each arch. This is now our center point or middle point. This lets you know this is the highest peak for the ball, as well as where most of your speed is going to be. Within those middle peaks, we're now going to dice every line we have here in half. So in half would be here and here. Same with here and here, 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 and there. With all those split up now, we do the same process again. And I'll change the color too because it's still the same area, just we're slicing it in half even more. Slice, 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 slice. Now for the top of the arches, we no longer have to slice it because those are the fastest points of this animation. However, for the smaller halves of the animation, we do need to go and in fact keep doing this process. So again, slice, 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 slice. And you keep repeating this until it kind of looks like a fast-paced animation. Whoops. You have to excuse me, sometimes my objects in here like to move around and I don't know how to fix them majority of the time. We'll put a line here. So now we have our fastest points of the animation, and we have our slowest parts of the animation. This is called the timeline. So now that we have our appropriate timeline, I will put it into one signified color so it does not hurt me retinas while I am trying to animate. Alright, so now that we have that, we're going to put it below our ball. There we go. We're going to put it below our ball and animate with the ball. So one, I can already see a little bit of a difficult situation, but it's workable. I'm going to put this here and just shrink my ball because my ball is a bit bigger than it should be. If your ball is big, just do the same thing I did. If it's too small, make it a little bit bigger. It never hurts to draw big, but it hurts to draw small. So I would recommend if you're animating, always draw anything you do huge. So when you reshrink it, it makes it a lot easier to work with. And I'm sure you're thinking, it's like, well, what if I reshrink it and I don't know what I reshrink it from? Always go to your properties, take whatever your height and your width is, copy it, paste it into another document so you have it for reference, and just constantly use that so you know how big something was in a previous scene. So now we're going to animate the ball. Our ball is obviously to a good start staying off screen, not being seen. It does not require any squash and stretch at this moment. But what we will do, you will now take this, use F6 to keep the same thing, and we're just going to use the onion skin, this one right here, as you can see the previous frame, and just move it up a smidge. Now I can see the problem with this because I started where the ball was. That's fine. This is still guidance and online, so we can just use those lines and push it up one. Anything that is close together is going to have more frames. The faster it goes, the less frames you're going to have. So do keep that in mind. Right now we're just pacing it out without using framing. We got another one right about here. And yes, it is a long, almost silent process. Does that make it weird or bad? No. Does it make it a little bit hard for people that do want to get into this? Yes. But with all good things comes time. So now we're finally getting to that arch. And as you can see, as it slowly goes down, I'm making sure also to keep it where the lines are, or the tick marks rather. Now there is a cheat to this. Like with anything, there are many cheats you can use. Can you use it for everything? Not really. There are sometimes you're going to unfortunately go back to frame by frame animation, which is drawing everything out. And it's gonna look like a hot mess. And you're probably going to question your sanity for about a whole 5 seconds or more. So, going back to what we have, we can start to rotate the ball. And again, this is what's so great about having onion skin on. So you don't need the previous one, but you always need what's in front of you now. So you can see what was the previous one behind you. Which I can see there was slight rotation. Do it again, but past that marker. Past that one. Now you can do it while you are animating it, in a sense, like instead of me putting the balls, I could have kept turning them, but that does consume a lot of your time. And when it comes to animation, you really don't want to waste this lot of your time, especially if you're trying to pump it out before a deadline. Does that put pressure on most people? Yes. I can admit that deadlines do put a sense of pressure on you. Is it intimidating the first few times? Of course. Unfortunately, the job world is like that, where you are going to be pushed beyond your limits. And it requires either time management or an in-depth look into what you want to do. So if you are going to do animations, especially with the South Park ones, because they are going to take you time to make sure the character remains on model and that its pacing looks, I would say, near, if not exactly, like the show. And Flip Reaper Z show or Jeff show has that quality. Is it slightly slower than the actual show? Yes. Does that make that horrible? No, because the rest of it stays so close to it. And he's had this problem before. It stays almost so close to it that even actual people couldn't tell like that was something that was fake. Moving back to the topic at hand, we're going to mess with the ball that we've just animated. It is going to hit the ground and it is spinning. So what we can do is we can squish it. It's going to look a little skewered, and that's okay. Because the premise of this ball is actually going to get skewered due to the fact it is being squished. Again, the whole premise of a squash and squish is that as this ball ends up going off the screen, it is going to end up looking like it's going to get smushed. And yes, it looks a little bit weird. Remember, there is no pacing to this so far, but I can see the squish even if it's for a split second. So from there, obviously, if you wanted to, you could always go back to frame 1 because it looks like it will rotate off that beautifully. And that's a cheat we'll use. For the moment, we'll just use this. So let's pace it out a bit. Let's say these can hold for 2 frames until they reach the closest top of the arch. Which I would say is there, there, there. And go back to using 2 frames per each thing. So that extended our time just a little bit, but it has a slow start, but a quick wrap around the loop. Now, if I wanted to, I could very well say maybe these 2 don't need the frame and can stay like that. So now if I wanted to, and we'll just move this to a new one so you can see what I mean. We'll take all these frames. Whoops. Didn't mean to do that. We'll take all these frames and just do a really kind of slow process, but it still works. All of these need to go behind the frame that we have over here. We need our onion on to see where the ball actually is going to end up going. And these just get bumped up very slightly. Hell, I'd even assume, looking from this guy right here, that this contender is a little bit better than this guy here. But we are trying to match it up exactly the way we see it, so. So it is a little bit of a cheat, however the frames still remain the same. You can bump them up, you can mess with them however you like, they're just in the same area so long as you keep them well centered. Speaking of well centered, I think this is trying to escape like usual. It happens to the best of us. So now that we have the top of the arch again, we're gonna remove one frame. And it will take some time to get used to drawing everything frame by frame. I do have my old assignments, which probably would have been nice to show as examples, but I feel like the real takeaway from this should be that if you can draw it on your own, you won't be as intimidated at this program like some beginning artists are. And I'll admit, I fell under that tree of being intimidated by this program. Mainly because I've never messed with Adobe Flash. That was my one fear of wanting to animate, is like, how do you use something like this? And the question of that would be determination. Instead of being left in the what ifs, you're trying to find an answer. Sometimes even researching it gives you that benefit of the doubt, like, I feel like I can handle this. Rather than waiting for someone to literally take your hand, because the teachers I have at my school don't do hand holding, which in a sense is strange, but it does make sense because they are trying to prepare something of the advertising world. Yes, there are schools that focus in a different field more than others. Alright, so now that we have that, we'll move this down here. Delete these. Save that for later, and now so yeah, it is going to look a little bit clunky, which is why we do mess with things when we feel like it. So for example, I can remove all these and switch it out. See if that removes a little bit of the clunkiness that we were feeling. And sometimes that's usually what it takes, a mere timing of seconds to figure out, how do I want this to go? Where should it go? What's my end point? What's the goal of the end of this animation? And also never try to think of like you're trying to impress other people. Always do it because you want to do this. You want to be happy with the end results. That's a lot better. See, and sometimes that's all it takes too, is figuring out the timing of what you want it to look like. I think even if I were to finish this, everyone here understands the point. Like, it follows that same premise. You can make this come off the screen with timing. If you wanted to, you can even go back as far as adding shadows. And that's really just taking the circle tool or the ellipse tool. And let me get blank keyframe. And that's really just taking an ellipse tool, making this into a shadow object. Again, movie clip, and calling it shadow. Going all the way to properties and adding the filter of blur. And that's all you have to do. You can blur it out so much that so long as within this animation that you keep this blur here and just shrink it as it goes up and make it go back to normal when it comes down, especially when it hits the ground here. So, and I'll do that real quick to do it with you. We'll just take this over here, grab the transformation tool and stretch that boy out, pull it down once, and now it's just a matter of centering it on the ball right about here. And really, you just follow the sense of where the ball is going. So if I were to say my midpoint here, and I wanted to use this shadow, so I go to line it up, bring it back down, and you can even use your your opacity to figure out, like, okay, if I put my finger here on the center point, is it centered? No. Now it is. Now that I have it back on my center point, all I really need to do is just slowly bring this in once, maybe a few more times. And it gives that sense of illusion that this ball now is within a distance. It isn't anywhere near us. And that ball size would carry on within the few frames that are here. I would say within the first 3. And then as you get probably closer down to the ground, like over here, you recenter it and pull it out maybe once or twice. I'd say maybe like that is good. And do the same thing. Move it over a few times. Pull it out once. Move it over again. Pull it out once. Move it over once more. Pull it out once. Oops, pull it out once. And obviously you can see the mistakes here, so we can just pull this back down. And even go as far as saying, like, okay, maybe the bounce isn't exactly where it needs to be. You can pull it down. We can say maybe the shadow started moving with the ball. And it's again the same process, so it's not going to look the prettiest, but if we were to pretend that shadow's there for the whole animation, it does give a realistic feel, like there is a shadow attached to this ball. You can even go as far as trying to keep it very behind the ball. But it does give this sense like there is a ball moving within this plain background. If you were to do more extreme animations, you want to mess with the elements of foreground, middle ground, and background, and that doesn't necessarily mean fill the foreground with a bunch of stuff, fill the background with a bunch of stuff. You want a defined balance. And what I can do real quick is actually use one of my animations as a guide. And we'll use the Luigi's Mansion because Mario Party, because that was the most extreme sense of foreground, middle ground, and background. And yes, there are elements you can use in Photoshop. This is obviously a Photoshop background with the element of an animated object back here. When you learn to, or if you need me to go over graphic symbols, that's also something I can do. Because a graphic symbol is the best example here, the door opening. That is not frame by frame. I have it set to a graphic, so it's synced in time with the camera zoom in. So as the camera zooms in, the door slowly animates to open. Animate is the only program that comes with the camera. In Flash, in that sense, you do have to find the actual, I believe it is a plugin, and you have to go and find it. And it's a little bit more convoluted than just messing with the actual built-in camera in Animate. When you use squash and stretch, you kind of want to exaggerate the squashing and the stretching. In some sense, you can cheat it by squishing the character themselves if they're already drawn. And you can always go based on that premise, or you can do the really exaggerated, like what happened to Mr. Shy Guy here, where that happens on its own. These are all drawn on different layers, his arms. Luigi's drawn on a different layer, or his teeth rather. This is extremely frame by frame, and by that I mean the best part of it being when he changes expression. You can abuse of smears, and that does not mean every animation needs to have a smear if you're doing frame by frame. Smears are best used when you're trying to trick the eye, or if there is a pose too extreme for you at the moment while you're learning. That's the best time to use smears. And smears is like if you've used if you've used Flipnote, where you tear off a part of the body or something, you pull it out a few smidgens, and you put it back in to make it seem like a character moves suddenly. That is the whole point of using smears as well. So as you can see, I pulled Luigi in two different directions, his head going to the right side and his body going to the left side. So when it snapped together, it looked like he was alright. These all here that you see, this is a foreground element, so it looks like Luigi is passing by a box. While everything here is set to a graphic element. The graphics being that they are already animated to do their walk, and all you have to do is create a motion tween that looks believable. Or if you know how to do the walk cycles, the walk cycle does it for you. And I'll show the other example of doing this same sort of action. You can use silhouettes. So if you already know what Luigi looks like, then you draw his backside. You can use shadows. In a sense, you can blur them. But if you're learning, I suggest you learn how to do the shape of the smoke first before you actually go about it. You can make it disperse, or you can leave it be. Sometimes I left it be because I thought it would work. I made his entire animation of the hammer, this whole swing of it, basically, was a cheat. That rope back there is actually a graphic. The camera pans are done on their own, and all I have to do is cheat a few things here and there. Like Luigi there is motion tween, his arm coming in front is just drawn. Could I have drawn it disappearing and reappearing? Actually, yes. Was it something I didn't know how to do and there was no instructions? Yeah, that happens. Well, when you're doing an art class, but there are some times when you look up reference, it's not there and it's not clear. Sometimes you have to cheat it, but it comes with time that you'll have an understanding of what happens. Big mistake that can happen, and this happened to me, and I will admit, it happened to me when I did not expect it, and it was already too late to go back into post and redo this. There are some times if you're not too careful with your foreground, middle ground, background elements, this can happen. As you can see, the Shy Guy clips completely over the box when he should have been under it. And that was a fault on my part for not checking your layers. That one wasn't labeled, that was my fault. And it can happen to you if you mislabel something, that kind of mistake will happen. So again, we got a motion tween, the camera pans over to Luigi contemplating his life, his choices, his regrets. And as the camera zooms in, this was more frame by frame. So from this face, I frame by frame his expression, looking up. And yes, this is a drastic change in how he looks. However, it does look believable that he is looking up. And I stretched him a bit, keeping that as a graphite while he does his emotion. I have him standing there, and the bag is drawn in to look like it's going to squish him. And yes, you can mess with that in a motion tween too to make it look like he gets squished. So that way, as the bag was falling, it looks like he was squished during that whole process. And we'll use the other two as a better example. Again, if you need me to actually do these, I can. But for the moment, we're discussing the basics. As good as I do like the first one, the ball. Alright, so now that we have this, and I'll go through this slowly. This is the walk cycle I'm talking about. And if you cannot tell, the background is extended vastly to cut time on animation process. This is another tip. If you have a large background and you already have a character walking within said background, all you really need to do is keep a shadow on that character anytime they walk, and we'll start with the basic walk. So this is usually how the walk cycle starts. You have a heel in front, the other one looks like it's about to bend upwards. That is your, these are your toes, this is your arch to heel, and it just kind of curves up. You hold that for as many frames as you need it to. In this case, I had it set to 2. Place it down, flat. The other foot looks like it's about to come up. 2. And again, now you have this number 4 shape. And yes, it is a weird looking 4, but the best way the teachers explained it to us is that if you imagine this as a 4, then it makes it a lot simpler to go and try to do this shape. So again, 2. And now you have the other foot is about to come in front, and this is about to do the same one that we saw on the first one. And 2, and now you just swap them. So you can use the same base. If you look at this, it's the same base, but I just swapped the feet out and shaded them differently so it had that same effect, but everything was different. So once that goes down, then we go back to what we started with. And as you can tell, that is a graphic. I believe that is 8 different animations on its own, but all timed to the pace of 2. Same with Sonic. When you see him come in, although he is not a still image, I have him motion tween running across the screen while the graphic plays out his animation. So if you look, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I believe this was the start. But they both change, making sure that it does cross in front of the body as well as behind it to give that illusion as this is a character using their legs. That also applies to any character you have coming in frame. You can cheat it. I would say time it well. Yes, I know he looks like a Diglett. I'm very sorry. But I did mess with his face because I felt like it had to be pushed, though I can't always get that drastic effect. I try to. There's more ways to do a diamond shine. In that sense, I was trying to figure out how to do it for the moment, since this was my first fully animation. So from there, I kind of had him look to the screen. And yes, you can mess with faces. Always drawing in-betweens helps. You don't have to do a lot, but if you can convey it in the best possible way, that's your best bet. Same with this. I had no idea how to draw this. And I was very confused. So I had to look up reference. And the most I could find on a reference was, I believe, this pose. And I drew that one fine, but going backwards from that pose was a little hard. So this was what came after it. Then this one. Then this, and I had to remind myself he is standing up, so I had to keep messing with it till he was standing up. And this is what I had for the clouds. This is when I had a better understanding of it at the time. The other ones I didn't have much of an understanding because of mistakes like these happened. So while this was here, for some reason I accidentally deleted the Master Emerald on this frame, which it should have already been there. But he does come to a good pose, and Sonic does come in. I did try to redraw those. Sometimes you have to redraw them more than a few times. And these were followed by a reference. I had the reference to the side, and I was trying to figure out how to do this. And sometimes that is your best bet. Reference can always be your best friend. This is a smear. I did want it to cheat some of it because I felt the more I animated it, the more I could get wrong. Just like Sonic's weird arm there, I got wrong while I was trying to focus on the main animation. So we do have him laughing. Sonic takes notice after the smear of his arm. Guy goes timber, and this is a very easy pivot moment. You take the transform and you make sure it's on the heels, and you slowly pivot him as he goes back. And I had Sonic's spikes move, as well as the game over screen come up. The last one, which was my most intense one that I had to do, in the sense I pushed myself due to being told I would never accomplish it. So I took it upon myself to say, hey, I'm going to push myself as much as I can. I made the Olympics building that says there's tryouts here. The Olympic tryouts. I drew this part, and this was where sometimes if you don't have the right programming, you can also accidentally screw yourself over. My Animate does not cooperate with my media encoder, which is something that you really need for some of these. So that gets rid of the camera, like I said, that helps a lot. So I ended up having to use Flash and trying to motion tween everything, which, if you can see as I go through this, some of the objects move a little too much. There were times that I started on the wrong side. I should have started from that side of the pool, leading up to the ladder. But for whatever reason, my brain did not register that correctly at the time. I also have Shadow looking at a sign that says the sign-ups. And you will see that this frame is reused again. So from there, by using the Sonic X method of the far away coming into frame, I tried staying true to the clouds that they had, using it as reference as best as possible, while making sure the character wasn't seen until he was needed on frame. Which we have a very happy shadow. Yes, I know it's not in character, but I wanted to emphasize that he is there. So it zooms in onto him, who then takes notice of the ladder. And if you hear me typing or hitting my keyboard aggressively, if you use the comma, and I believe that is the period, if I'm not, yeah, and the period, it allows you to swipe through a YouTube, seeing it frame by frame. And yes, you will see my animation errors and how it's done. So as you can see, part of his spike does move, but it's not as it's not really there unless you see it and you're staring at it. It's subtle because your eyes are focused on shadow. So as his ears fold back slowly, so does his eyes sort of shrink along with what happened. This is the one where the error happened the most. His back wouldn't bend within time, and as you can see, this is trying to fall faster than the ladder. Which in the camera, that was actually not something that showed up. So now he's concerned about what's going to happen, and we have Sonic walking on frame. Now there's two ways I could have done this. I could have kept Sonic walking in slowly like that, or I could have done a motion tween and bent it as best as possible to make it seem like he bumps on the screen. Now, we all watch Sonic characters, so we know that their eyes are how they look over to their friends and talk to them, because they have this wide peripheral. And yes, sometimes you can keep this blue, sometimes you can keep it skin tone. I believe the Sonic X kept it blue, while others try to keep it skin tone. It matters on preference. And you can have them open their mouth. They don't have to talk, but you can have them just open it up just for a little bit. Same with like my logo character here. Since I had her updated, I chose to use her at the time and just used her as a secondary character to kind of give comfort. So as he's slowly thinking about his choices, his ears go back up like, alright, I think I'm raring to go. And this took several different layers. But you can see he goes from being not so confident, this frown face, to line, small smile, bigger smile, and eyes are now in front. And this is where, if I play it, you can see that he does it regularly. Like, it's a nice gentle bump, whereas the other two, you can tell were programmed. And here we have a smear. And that smear does start from the bottom here, and does follow up here. But instead of making the full thing, like, come around, I didn't want the smear to be too obvious. So, I had it for a few frames and snap up. Whereas Sonic now, his eyes slowly were opening as both of his hands do a very quick smear and snap into place. Now, a better way you can execute this is before it snaps into place, bump the characters down, like with Flipnote. You bump them down maybe a few pixels, and then when they get to this pose, it looks like they kind of snapped into place perfectly. There are cheats you can do. This is a kind of Looney Tunes kind of cheat where the characters are far away. They're almost seen like little jumping jelly beans. This water is a graphic, excuse me. These poses that you're going to see are graphic. So we have him coming up, appearing, and my favorite, the graphic that shows him shimming all the way to here. And before he reaches the end, I had already made like a snap into place, which is a smear. I used a smear and made him snap into place, rather than trying to draw the execution. Again, another graphic, and we have the back of his head looking down. This is the more harder part because we were still trying to understand how to use the diving board technique. Let me tell you, it is not easy. It might be best to do frame by frame, who knows. The usage of smears here, they don't have to be straight perfect lines, but so long as they overlap each other and don't give away the space, you're fine. Now, I could have made him go in faster, but I was actually really proud with the water, which, as you can see, is hand-drawn frame by frame. Same with if you were to see the bubbles, which he actually comes back up. The bubbles, excuse me, my tongue. The bubbles suddenly appear almost out of thin air, but as they stay on screen, they fluctuate and fluctuate till he starts to show up. And as you can see, they get bigger as he starts to show up. Why did I click that? I meant to hit just that. So as he comes up for his gasp of air and settles back down into the water, the bubbles are now suddenly gone. And he stays under the water. And we have, oh, Toad is crooked-eyed. Again, smears. 10. SBO has his smear. Now, the lack of 2 smear is kind of obvious because I kind of just pull him immediately. But since it happens so fast within the frames per second, you don't really notice it. The same with his eyes shimmering and the black circle coming in. If I were to play it, let's say from the more important parts that didn't break, so you have an understanding of how it looks real time. It's a little clunky, yes, but the eyes move over like if you were watching the shows and everything. His walking, the bumping around, the eyes shimming, his actual shimmy that took so long, the snap into place, everything flows within a sort of beat. I didn't have a problem with timing. It was always a problem with adding maybe more in-betweens. But everything happens so fast you don't really notice it. And I think that's the real takeaway when you're trying to animate. If you really need me to go over any other basics that revolve around, like, how did you animate the water, the composition or the placements, what's the best compositions to do when starting off with a basic animation, things like that, I'm more than willing to answer because I've gone through those classes. I'm not going to sit here and be one of my teachers and say it has to look exactly like this. I can give my best I can give my best knowledge as well as my best critiques. So if you're already doing an animation, it's like, I have this storyboard here. And I think my best example of trying to say, like, I have a storyboard, and I think I threw it in here by accident. If I were to take this and try to already do it, it's already a storyboard pre-made. Would some things have to be changed so it looks correct? Of course, the floor has to be straight. These lines have to be straight. This has to be put into perspective. That's all fine and dandy. It's done in post. Why? Because you have the storyboard that already elaborates on the story. I have Driven here standing with his swords. His position, perfect. All I'd have to do really is come back into Animate, ink this, and you're done. This would be the kind of critique I would give. Because the critique I would give to myself, really bad perspective, but this was also during the time I didn't know perspective. This is not in perspective. This is fine, but needs to be skinnier. But it works. The same with him and his perspective. It works. But if anyone needs any help, let me know in the comments below. Hit me up whichever way you can. I don't care if you have to go onto my page or within any of my videos and trying to leave a comment. If you put a comment once this video is posted, if you need that kind of help, I am willing to help. If you're looking more to do the South Park rigging, that's going to take a little bit more time. I do have rigs I can use. It's just going to take a little bit more time because in the South Park style, whereas your own, you have to be almost closer precise to the show to really capture that South Park kind of mentality. But otherwise than that, I will see you all in the next video, and I hope your day is going well, and I really hope this video has helped you today. Bye bye.